FBI Director Christopher Wray appeared before the House Judiciary Committee yesterday for nearly 5 hours.
Ray's Republican, right?
He's
Republican.
Appointed by Donald Trump.
He's appointed, so he's a Trump appointee, and Trump, only the best people.
A Trump-appointed Republican.
Trump-appointed Republican. Okay, yeah. Okay.
So he fielded questions from some of the same members of Congress who have recently called for his impeachment.
But those are Republicans, too. So Republicans want to impeach a Republican? Why?
Trump Republicans want to impeach a Trump-appointed Republican.
Why?
Despite being appointed by Donald Trump and a registered Republican voter, Republican lawmakers have baselessly accused Wray of using the FBI to target those with conservative beliefs, including the former president himself. Director Wray was having none of it.
There is a two-tier justice system that has been weaponized to persecute people based on their political beliefs, and that you have personally worked to weaponize the FBI against conservatives.
I would disagree with your characterization of the FBI and certainly your description of my own approach. The idea that I'm biased against conservatives seems somewhat insane to me, given my own personal background.
You preside over the FBI that has the lowest level of trust in the FBI's history. People trusted the FBI more when J. Edgar Hoover was running the place than when you are. And the reason is because you don't give straight answers.
Respectfully, Congressman, in your home state of Florida, the number of people applying to come work for us and devote their lives working for us is up over 100%.
January 6th, was beyond a weaponization of government. It was a nuclearization of government against the government. I think Tucker Carlson and some of the members' colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said that Ray Epps was a secret government agent in helping encourage this crime so as to make the president look bad. Do you have any knowledge of Ray Epps being a secret government agent?
No. I will say this notion that somehow the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and agents is ludicrous.
I want to use and examine the case of the Mar-a-Lago documents because it's been used by the former president as a pitying moment, as though he has somehow been victimized.
I don't want to be commenting on the pending case, but I will say that there are specific rules about where to store classified information and that those need to be stored in a SCIF, a secure compartmentalized information facility. And in my experience, ballrooms, bathrooms, and bedrooms are not SCIFs.
Mike Barnicle, this went on for 5 hours yesterday. Director Wray sat in that chair, calmly rebutted and took down some conspiracy theories and defended the FBI. I have to say it is disorienting, and Joe has made this point many times, and probably for you, someone who's covered Republicans for a long time, to see Republican members of Congress attacking with such venom the FBI, attacking the military, attacking the Justice Department, all these law enforcement stalwarts now they view as a part of a deep state conspiracy. And why are they doing all this? It goes back to the root of defending Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's an extremely unusual way of trying to grow your political party, to take on one of the more legendary, certainly, elements of government and one of the more honored elements of government, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And then, as you point out, in addition to that, they have attacked the American military on many occasions. And they continue to do it. Now, is it a fringe of the Republican Party? Is it the majority of the existing Republican Party in Congress? That we don't know. But I don't think it's a majority, even close to a majority, of Republican voters out there. Even Republican voters should be offended at the totally ignorant approach many members of that party took yesterday against Director Wray.
The problem, Mike, is that the leaders of the House Republicans are talking this way. The people that are running the committees, some of the most powerful, some of those most influential people hate law enforcement. They hate the FBI. They hate the premier law enforcement agency in America. They hate military leaders. They're constantly trashing the United States military. It's crazy what they're doing. They're blocking the Marine Corps, the United States Marine Corps, from having a commandant for the first time in 150 years. They say they wish American military people could be as tough and masculine as the Russian military. I mean, are you kidding me? Would we like to ask the Russian military? And you know what we ought to do? We ought to talk to those 500 Wagner Group thugs that rushed the United States military and asked. Oh, we can't. They were all killed in like 2 or 3 minutes. You know, I think the U.S. troops were probably watching MLB and somebody said, Russians are attacking us. They go, okay, kill them. And then they went back to the game before the end of the inning. It was over just like that. And you've got Republicans saying that they want our troops to be more like Russia. It's absolutely insane. And Katty Kay, they talk about defunding the FBI because the FBI is trying to actually enforce laws against people who steal nuclear secrets. And this is what Chris Wray said yesterday. Defunding the FBI, like these Republicans want to defund the FBI, it would hurt the American people, neighborhoods and communities all across this country, the people who are protecting from cartels, violent criminals, gang members, predators, foreign and domestic terrorists, and cyber attacks. Like, these Republicans want to gut an agency that protects Americans from terrorists, foreign and domestic, from people who are trying to steal their identities, from people who are draining money out of their parents' and grandparents' bank accounts, drug cartels who are trying to push more and more fentanyl into this country. That is who the House Republicans have declared to be their enemy.
Yeah, we look back at what's happened in the United States since 2001 and the attacks of 9/11. And part of the reason that America has not been attacked again in that kind of awful way, and other countries here in Europe have been attacked, is because of the work of the FBI, because of the investigations that they have carried out on foreign and increasingly on domestic terrorists who would like to do harm to American people. Without the FBI, the chances of some kind of attack on the United States grow exponentially. I thought what was really interesting about the hearings yesterday was how Chris Wray just managed to keep it super low key. He didn't give people like Matt Gaetz that opportunity, that clip where you saw the director of the FBI getting angry, which it felt at times like Matt Gaetz was trying to rile him into doing that. And he also turned the tables a bit and he said, listen, why have the number of people applying to the FBI from your state, from Florida and from Texas, gone up by something like 100% if the American population is so opposed and thinks, you know, that this is a terrible institution? I think he handled it as well as he possibly could, given the kinds of attacks and the conspiracy theories that he was having to deal with.